Hi, I'm Ed. Welcome to Common Sense.
How you doing, Ed?
I'm good, John. How about you?
Doing great. So today we're going to talk about whether or not every customer-facing team should have at least one dedicated data analyst. And by that I mean not some account manager who happens to look at data now and then, but someone who's totally dedicated to it and responsible for, not just managing data, but gaining insights, reporting, notifying people, automation, all those kinds of things. And, I haven't seen that very often, especially in small to mid-sized companies. Have you, Ed?
I haven't, but it's a fascinating question because data pervades everything that we're talking about. And you go into even small and medium-sized companies and they've got a designer, because design pervades print collateral and websites and all that stuff. So I think, is an interesting analogy as data becomes both the driver and the enabler, and I shouldn't say both. I mean, it is a driver and enabler, and in fact, a monetizable product in many cases of the work that marketing and sales teams are doing. So there's an opportunity to make money from it. Often I think companies have kind of left it up to IT or maybe finance because that's where some of the analytical horsepower has traditionally resided in organizations. But there's really different needs today. I mean, first, sales and marketing and customer service, they're collecting vast amounts of data. Some of it is user data, some of it is transactional data. A lot of that's stored in various places, contact databases, marketing automation, CRM, customer service platforms, who knows, it's all over the place. A lot of that data can be very specific to the functions and needs to be interpreted by the team for how they're doing their day-to-day jobs, but also embedded in it is a huge amount of insight. And there's, all sorts of buyer behavioral data too that talks about how people are interacting with you and what's important to them. And that's got to be distilled in the right way and served to the right people in your team in the right way so that it's actionable for them, both tactically and strategically. Mm-hmm. And the reality, we've talked before about the situation with websites and IT departments. IT project managers and analysts kind of live in a different world than marketing and sales. And there's a lot of frustration when you're sitting around the conference table. And this isn't intended as, a slam of one group or the other. It's just, people are different. They look at the world differently. They get different functions. So it's not just enough today to collect the data or to maintain hygiene of it. And once you have it, just kind of hand it off and expect sales and marketing people to somehow magically cull through it and intuit what they're supposed to do to find the real nuggets. I mean, it's got to be a much more deliberate sort of a process. Just like you don't let every salesperson do their own design, you've got a designer that maintains the brand and the look and the feel. It's probably time that everybody has an analyst as part of that team. But that's only, I've only touched on a couple of things I ought to be doing. You've, I'm sure, got a long list with your IT background and your data. I mean, you're an analyst yourself. I'm going back to your early career. So what other kinds of things should these analysts should we be thinking about having them do?
Well, I think you've identified most of the main roles and responsibilities, but I think you're right. I mean, I think having someone on the customer success team who knows data, who lives and works it and is responsible for it is just kind of a no-brainer to me. I'm surprised most companies don't do that. And I guess it's just another hungry mouth to feed. But like you said, there's so many benefits. And, we could start with some, drilling down a little bit on you mentioned the value of the data, especially contact database that companies have and all the marketing and sales and all the engagements that they make with your brand. So just being responsible for that database has a lot of responsibilities involved, including cleaning it up. You mentioned hygiene. Well, most databases, if you go in cold and start looking at them, are full of duplicate records. As people change jobs or they move or, change roles and responsibilities, a lot of that data is either duplicated or it's incorrect.
Right.
So just getting that cleaned up can make a huge difference in how effective your sales and marketing are. And then, a lot of companies will hire data from third parties. so-called rental, of contacts. And that can be a problem too, because some of that data can be either old or incorrect. And then there's often problems with all kinds of different kinds of records in the databases, companies and accounts and deals. And there's all these business entities that are out there, and how well do they correspond to things that are in other types of databases that you might be working.
Right.
So there's a huge responsibility there just to take care of the data and make sure it's accurate. And then let's not forget about privacy. I mean, we talked in a previous session about GDPR, and now California's got a new privacy law coming out. So who's going to handle that? Is the IT department going to be responsible for privacy as well as security? Well, they don't really know who the people are in the contact database, and they wouldn't really know how to, do the right thing as far as privacy is concerned. That's really something that is in the customer-facing team, the sales and marketing and customer service team. So someone has to be responsible for implementing ways of reaching out to them, getting their permission, and so on. So, there's a lot to do. And it makes sense to me to hire a new analyst, but that could cost, anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000 or more, depending on where you are and what kind of industry you're in. So how can we get management on board with that kind of investment?
There's probably a couple different ways to do it. I mean, you make a great point, really unrelated to analysis, about security. And security is a senior executive and board concern these days. Data security is a huge issue. There's also, I think, opportunities. You could sit down and you could calculate the cost of bad data. I mean, if you damage your email send reputation because you've got a bunch of duplicates, and this primary tool that you've got that you demonstrate you're able to use to grow revenue at such and such a rate every year is impaired because of that, well, there's an actual cost to failing to properly maintain data. And the flip side is the opportunity cost. How could you monetize it, or what additional could you be doing with it? So I think the math formula is probably actually pretty simple. The question is whether people would be convinced by it. And I think maybe the right way to approach it is, as a first step, just kind of identify tiers of what you need in terms of that data analysis. There's that first level of hygiene and collection, maybe a second level of kind of identifying important data. There's so much of it. In many cases, if you track 73 different things in your dashboard, guess what? You're not paying attention to any of them. I don't know what the maximum number is, whether it's 3 or 5 or 1. I don't know, but it's certainly less than 73. And who's really thinking about that and helping make that selection? How do you create the reports that really empower management? This ties in with picking the right data signals, but good reporting that's aesthetically easy to monitor and assimilate is important. Looking for the direct insights. For instance, something simple like differences in conversion rates with mobile versus desktop users. That doesn't take a ton of analytical ability, but it takes somebody with time and determination to sit down and look at the data. And once you identify that, then you can begin to work on it. Then, there's really deep, true analysis that I think almost never happens at the SMB level. Stuff that really is buried in the data that only somebody that understands how to interpret data and how to go through it can extract those insights from it. And so it's, I think, important to realize that each of these steps, you can do them. Like you said, the account manager or somebody can do them, but that's different than doing them really well, even at the simple, the hygiene kind of a level. And so that's where that expertise, somebody that's trained to think like an analyst, may be able to really make a difference.
Yeah.
And many companies, they gather their data reasonably well. Marketing automation, we've talked about all these tools, driving traffic, converting visitors, tracking those leads. I mean, that's a fairly efficient process of collecting data, but it's not so clear once that data is collected, who owns it? Who's responsible for all the massaging that needs to be done? Is it the inbound consultant or the account manager? They're probably trained to use tools like HubSpot and Google Analytics, but they probably haven't had statistics. They probably haven't had a management responsibility, carrying a P&L to really understand how they want to look at and understand data. They may not be able to discern important points about significance and attribution. they can certainly create some reports and explain them to managers, simple reports in a way that helps them understand the data and make some tactical decisions, but it's probably not going to impact the company strategically. And they may not have a sense of how to evaluate different technology options and kind of the right tools for data analysis and whether you need BI or whether you just need a tool that helps you pull in information and manipulate it in different ways. On the other hand, could it be the salesperson or the customer service rep? I think that's unlikely. All joking about sales aside, you and I both sell and have sold, and so we can kind of pick on ourselves a little bit. But, those are people with a different focus and a different skill set, and often, probably impatient with sitting down and spending a ton of time looking at detailed data. They're moving in a different direction. So that's kind of some of the impediments, I guess, to having an in-house person do it. But again, you being a data person yourself, what are some of the other values that if you had a really sharp data person doing those things that a company would realize from it?
Well, I think we've already made a compelling case for hiring somebody. I mean, there's an awful lot to do retroactively, and there's so much data coming in that, it's pretty easy to say that this is something we need. But going forward, it's likely that we're going to be inundated with even much more data and much more capability for analyzing data and for predicting. And so looking ahead, you're having a conversation about AI and predictive algorithms. So it's not enough to just look back. We're going to be looking forward, and we're going to be predicting who's going to be doing what.
Right.
Where are our customers out there, and how do we find them, and how do we communicate with them? And we can use these algorithms to help us do that, but somebody needs to train the algorithms, for example, with machine learning, and just taking a case, of how this might be applied. I mean, wouldn't it be nice to know that, an individual buyer, what makes them tick?
Right.
And where, how do they behave, and what are they most likely to be interested in? If we could do that, that would accelerate sales. It would reduce customer acquisition costs, and it would help us to expand accounts. And that's really the dream. I mean, if we can do that, then you can actually directly prove ROI.
If you could do a market of one at scale, that's nirvana, right?
Absolutely. And it makes things more efficient too. So there's a cost savings. So it's possible nowadays with predictive analytics and prescriptive attribution, some of the buzzwords we use for really describing this methodology where we're reaching out one-to-one and identifying the right people at the right time. And that can be done. It just but someone needs to do it. Someone needs to own it, as you said earlier. Someone needs to be an expert and know how to use the software and how to evaluate the software. And, somebody's got to own that too. So there's a lot to do, and it's not going to get any less in the future. So I think we're reaching agreement here that every company really needs to, if they're doing digital sales and marketing and service at scale, they need at least one good data analyst. And it's hard to find those people. So, it's a competitive world for those guys. It's a good job to have right now if you're really good at it. So, but this might not work for every company. Which types of companies might be the exceptions?
Well, so I think that we're talking about data primarily in the context of sales and marketing. But one of the interesting things, we spent a lot of time in the past talking about IoT and IIoT and some of the other manufacturing 4.0 technologies. And so there's a whole parallel set of data that's related to the product and the consumption of the product. And although they're separate, in many ways, they start to overlap. And so it's easy to say, well, geez, we're a small company. We only have, 10,000 contacts in our database. And so we don't need an analyst to manage that. And that's, possibly true, although data hygiene with 10,000 contacts can be just as vexing as it is with larger databases. But probably the bigger question is about the data picture overall and where that data is accumulated from and who's got the vision for how to manage it and monetize it and how it ties in with helping sell and build the IP internally for a consistent replicable sales process. we've talked about whether companies should insource or outsource their digital marketing, and that may also play a role. I mean, probably one of the arguments in favor of outsourcing might be the fact that if an agency has done a really good job cultivating its own internal analysis muscle, if you will, you can kind of bolt some of that on as part of the outsource engagement as opposed to having to do it all internally. There's going to certainly be a temptation for companies to say, okay, well, this is going to be something that someone does half their job, and well, they've got an engineering degree, and so they think logically and linearly. They're going to be fine as an analyst, except, we know that that's a different trained skill set. And just because somebody can do it doesn't mean they're doing it artfully and really well. Larger mid-sized companies, they probably already have analysts on staff doing, various functions with BI and production management, resource planning, and those kinds of things. But those are different than sales or marketing. And the skill sets could certainly be brought over. But if you ask somebody that spends all day doing production planning or supply chain sort of planning and say, oh, by the way, we spend 2 hours a week looking at our sales data, it's just not going to work very well. So, what's the answer? It sounds like we're agreeing on the fact that, yes, absolutely, companies, except perhaps the very smallest, need an analyst working on their data. How they get there, where they pull that in from, there's some opportunity for companies to be flexible, I guess, based on their situation. So I think we've kind of reached agreement as we always do. I enjoy our arguments or our discussions because we always seem to come to a point where we've found a great kind of consensus position that companies can build on very effectively. So I guess that wraps it up from my perspective. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Ed.
And I'm John. So next week, we'll be diving in on another main theme of our soon-to-be-released book, which is Common Sense Revenue Growth. And the question we're going to tackle is, are complex sales getting harder? So
that's a rhetorical question, right? I mean, we all know the answer to that.
Either way, we'll answer it next week. So join us then. Thanks.